Welcome back. Season 2 of Just Talking with Joe Burdick. I'm so excited to be doing this for another year. I'm so glad I did. I had amazing conversations with amazing veterans and Gold Star family members last year. I'm looking forward to another fun year. I've got some great conversations lined up, and I thought it would be fun for my first conversation in this second year. I wanted to talk to my friend, Kristal Kent. Kristal is an Army veteran and an advocate, and for fibromyalgia. And I'm looking forward to having this conversation with her because honestly, I don't know a lot about fibromyalgia and I didn't want to look it up. I wanted her to educate me and anyone that watches this with about fibromyalgia. I've got a million questions. When I served in the military, honestly, I didn't serve with any women. So I have a lot of questions about women in the Army. So, Kristal, welcome to my podcast.
Thank you for having me and sharing your space today so that I could be here and be a guest and hopefully provide some interesting and even some funny little anecdotes today and information.
Well, you know what I've learned about Army veterans is you guys have some pretty good stories. Navy guys, we have some I don't know if you to believe them or not, but the Army veterans that I've talked to, they always seem to have some good stories. So I'm looking forward to learning your story, to sharing it, and keeping these memories out there forever. So let's get started. I mean, the Army, what made you? I think I read about 17% of the total military force is women, something like that. What made you, first of all, where are you from?
So I grew up in Berea, Ohio, graduated
Mhm.
from Berea High School, and then graduated from Baldwin Wallace University. So
And
Berea through and through.
what made you coming from Berea? Anybody that doesn't know, that's where the Cleveland Browns training facility is. What made you want to join the Army?
Okay, so to preface it, originally I thought I was going to join the Air Force. Since I was a freshman in high school, I knew I wanted to join the military. I come from a long line of military service members in my family. Um, and I've done some research and have found that I have had distant ancestors. Like it's not like I met them, but they served in the Revolutionary War. I am also a descendant of Lakota and Sioux tribal nations and found that I had, I don't know, it's like 10 or 12 times removed, but had ancestors that fought in, what was it, Custer's Last Stand, Battle of Bighorn, and my native ancestors and all their tribal um, cohorts kind of handed Custer himself back on a platter there. So I have a long history of family in the military, and it was just something. I don't know. I just felt like that's what I wanted to do. And I think right now I'm like one of four, or is it five generations alive right now of veterans in my family?
Wow, that's great.
Yeah. And myself and my aunt both served in the army. So we're the only females, but I have family members that have served in every branch, with the exception of Space Force. But I'm sure eventually one day down the road, and I won't be alive when that happens. But down the road, we probably will have someone in the family that ends up in Space Force. But yeah, so it was just one of those things. It wasn't like we'd be at family reunions and be like, "Oh yeah, military," But it was having that experience of being around so many family members and individuals, and at times meeting some of their friends here and there that they served with, or hearing their stories. And I just felt like it just, it, I don't know how to explain it. Like, how you just know something. It was one of those
Mhm.
things that I knew. Now, originally my intent was to join the Air Force. However, when I was looking, for lack of a better term, shopping around the branches, the Army at the time seemingly had more to offer than the Air Force as far as like jobs and, uh, you know, openings in Ohio, stuff like that. So I ended up going Army. Instead of Air Force. And people ask me when they know my full story, um, if I regret or if I wish. And I was like, no, because you know what? I don't know who I would be as a person if I went to a different branch, or what I do now, obviously, and we'll get into that, kind of catapult me addressing some systemic and societal issues afflicting veterans as a whole and those living with fibromyalgia, both civilians and veterans, and women veteran, uh, systemic issues that women veterans contend with. So I'm not saying like the trajectory of my life was purposeful and where I'm at right now, but without it, maybe I wouldn't be leaving such a like a social good footprint on the world, like doing my little part in a space that I'm a part of, to hopefully make things better for both veterans and those living with fibromyalgia.
Okay.
Mhm.
So I learned something. The Army doesn't call it boot camp.
Mm-mm.
Uh, so when you got shipped off to basic training, where did you go?
Fort Leonard Wood.
And where's that at?
Missouri.
Missouri.
Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, often called Fort Misery or Fort Lost in the Woods. And I ended up being there on active duty for like quite some time. So that I would say would not be my favorite base, because you're in the middle of nowhere. And every base has its own mentality or culture. And I have good memories and funny memories. Obviously, serving in the military, there's always the not so good memories as well, and I have some of those. Um, it wouldn't have been my number one pick. Let's just put it that way.
Hmm.
But every experience has opportunity of learning and growth as well. So that's kind of take it for a grain of salt. And I, like I've been to other bases. I'm like, oh, their facilities are so nice.
Mhm.
And I'm like, oh wow, like this is, it'd be just the little things. But I think sometimes being in a place that is not up to par compared to other bases, I think, you learn some skills with that as well. So, and just kind of also it teaches you that when you're somewhere else, like when I was at went to Fort McCoy in Wisconsin and got to go there a couple of times. I was like, I think you really truly appreciate the amenities, however you say it,
Amenities.
amenities, yeah, at other bases. And I'm like, dang, y'all living like it's the Taj Mahal up in here, but that's all right. It's all good. I know how to survive, on less than. So
Right.
yeah.
So what was your MOS? Now that wasn't a Navy term, so I had to look up what MOS actually is. What did
Yeah,
you
so
do?
military occupational skill. And for anyone who isn't in the military, it just means what our military job was. So at the time, 91 Bravo went in dietary, uh, assigned to a combat support hospital. But that kind of changed a little bit with some national circumstances, and we can get into that later on. But yeah, so it sounds of like a fancy military job, but it's not. And a lot of
Hmm.
times, like they're like, yes, you potentially will make menus or do dietary
Hmm.
needs for people that are hospitalized, but it's usually like, yeah, you're in the chow hall making sure like you have all the basic food groups to serve that day. It's just not, it's not glamorous. So,
Hey,
but
listen, the two most important jobs are the people in the chow hall and
mhm,
supply.
yeah.
Those are the two that we needed everybody the most.
Mhm. Right.
So
And I was always like, don't make your chow hall people mad.
no, no, God, no.
Don't, you don't want to do that. But I mean, it's it's kind of funny when people are like, "Oh, what's your MOS?" And then you're like, "Well, it's this," and it was here's the title, but what it really was this. It's so it's like even any like civilian job. Like I was like an adult advocacy coordinator in one of my civilian jobs, and it sounds so glamorous, but a lot of times it was a lot of paperwork of like things that and I'm like, yeah, I mean, yeah, there was that advocacy part for individuals, but the amount of time I spent with individuals was outpaced by the amount of paperwork I had to do for each
Mhm.
individual and
Right.
issues. So it's like, yeah, you're doing good things, but a lot of your time is like paperwork and kind of like the military, right? So I guess I was
Yeah.
kind of you know, good for that position just to be like, all right, another report to
Mm.
do. So yeah.
Did you go out of the country at all?
No, fortunately not. When so what happened was I was injured in the line of duty stateside, and I was in a military truck that like crashed, but not like this crazy like what you see in epic movies crash. It was just kind of like in a ditch. But it was the typical what they call like a cattle car, those big huge trucks that sometimes they have the canvas over top and
Mhm.
and when you have people in the back, it's like a truck bed, but there's no seat belt. So I mean,
I've been in
yeah,
those.
yeah, so they're not the safest vehicle to be in, and the simplest, I don't know, simplest, crash where it's not like, "Oh my gosh, it didn't crash in a tree and caught on fire," but it had, some devastating, outcomes, not just for myself, but for other people. One individual that was in there, like both of his hips were broken. So I was lucky, but I did sustain like injuries. I had already had knee surgery on my right knee. So this is like it was literally like 5 weeks or 6 weeks after having knee surgery. So I already had that. And then it essentially, injured both my knees and my hips, and there were some other things that weren't caught at the time, like my neck. I've had so many surgeries that kind of were in response to those injuries, and we'll circle back to this, but that was kind of like the trigger for me developing fibromyalgia. Um, but yeah, so that was, not a good experience. But I'm like, hey,
Mhm.
listen, 2.5 ton truck. I tangoed with it and I'm still standing type. So I'm like, I'm still here. It's not always easy and whatnot, what have you, but
Right.
here I am. And the interesting thing is that those injuries eventually they were kind of like, hey, you're not deployable. Like these are severe enough that you're not deployable. And so you can't meet readiness. And then the medical board process was started with me. And I actually did fight it, but in the midst of all that, September 11th happened. And then what the army did is like basically stop loss, or everybody was on hold from being discharged or med boarded. So I got held over, and that was kind of when things became more interesting, um sort of. um but yeah, so that kind of is just a snapshot of a little bit of my experience and the injuries and how it kind of was like the stepping stone in the future that parlayed into what I'm doing now. There's other experience outside that, um, as a female veteran from like observations and just some inner supportive crisis interventions I was involved with providing for soldiers in crisis that kind of shapes a lot of my advocacy as well. I focus on veteran issues and fibromyalgia issues, but also focusing on issues negatively impacting women veterans, but also mental health, and risk of suicide. So, yeah, in a nutshell, that small incidents kind of springboard a lot of things in my life that I have, do now. So,
Well, it's funny because the next thing I was going to ask you was how your military experience shaped you as a person who you are today, and it sounds like that's exactly it.
well, yeah, one of the things is I'm one of those people, if I'm like, hey, if I'm having an issue or if I'm struggling with someone and I have all this skill set in advocacy and in healthcare and um, educational experience, if I'm having problems being able to address my needs within the healthcare system or barriers I contend with as a veteran or as a female veteran, if I'm experiencing this, then other people are too.
Right.
And so that is when I kind of was just like, well, what is one way to address this to help my fellow veterans and people with fibromyalgia and so that led to uh, a, a lot of it was just all stepping stones to all the awareness and advocacy initiatives that I do. But yeah, so it does, everyone's experience in life, military or not, it does shape who we are or how we perceive the world or what we do or choose not to do. So obviously, like these were, those are just a few real life experiences that have contributed to where I'm at now, what I
Mhm.
do. I don't know, just trying to, you ever hear that saying like there's people who will walk through the fire of hell and then go back and bring buckets of water to help other people. So I feel like we all do this in our own way. Every person in the world, like we all go through something. And we're just trying to navigate it for ourselves, but also realize that, we got to bring some water back for other people who are going through the same thing. And so that's kind of how I look at it.
It's funny is it's not funny, haha, but I always think I do a lot to help my fellow veterans. I'm so honored to know you because you actually inspire me to want to do more. What you do for our fellow veterans is pretty friggin' amazing. And that's obviously one of the main reasons why I wanted to do this with you today is because you do so much for people that need it, and you know where the people you touch are definitely lucky, so
Oh,
thank you.
that's so very sweet. Thank you.
Well,
I don't
so
know. I
oh,
don't
go
know if
ahead.
you want me to expand on that for your viewers. Some of
Heck
this
yeah, let's do it.
on this stuff. So, as a person living, as a woman veteran living with fibromyalgia and having the professional experience and educational experience I had, I took my experiences and parlayed it into my initiatives, the Fibromyalgia Pain Chronicles and Veteran Voices for Fibromyalgia. Um, my experience, so going back to, so there was that military vehicle accident and I sustained a lot of injuries and re-injuries, which led to, unfortunately, I was no longer considered deployable. Um, and I was med boarded out. And those were like the trigger for me to develop fibromyalgia. And just to give a little bit background, like fibromyalgia, it's one of the least funded medical conditions for specific driven research. And so we're kind of like laying in the winds, just waiting for our turn. But what they do know is they don't know the root cause of fibromyalgia, but there's some identification of triggers that increase your risk of developing fibromyalgia. One is if it runs in your family. Like serious, like what they'll say, physical trauma, like injuries, repetitive, like sports injuries, surgeries, multiple surgeries, and I've had all those right there. Um, they also say that a trigger of developing fibromyalgia or increasing your risk of developing it is if you have like another serious illness. So if you have an autoimmune disorder, I know a lot of people with cancer who developed fibromyalgia. Veterans, they do identify like Gulf War related illnesses and like Lyme's disease or Epstein-Barr virus. They also have said that serious emotional trauma can be a trigger for fibromyalgia. So we have these 4 points where they say these 4 things could increase your risk of developing fibromyalgia. So for myself, I come to find out it was literally, it wasn't until 2014 that I was officially diagnosed with fibromyalgia, but I had all these myriad of symptoms from that military vehicle accident up until 2014 that just didn't make sense. I knew I had arthritis and all these joint injuries and whatnot, but I was having all these other things that were coming up that did not make sense. Like I would just have like these pains in my muscles and stuff, and I would get migraines, and I would have like GI upset, and it was just, you know, I'd go through bouts of what I now know is chronic fatigue. And I was experiencing that for like 14 years. And over time, it was progressing or getting worse. And what happened in those 14 years is that the doctors were they definitely, medical institutes and healthcare facilities and medical providers as a whole, they're more knowledgeable about fibromyalgia now, but not where they should be. But back then, going to 2000 through 2014, definitely not. So basically, the doctors were kind of just doing symptom management or saying, oh, that pain that you're experiencing in your quad muscles is referred pain from your arthritis from your hips and your knees. And I just was like, yeah, no, that doesn't make sense. But okay. So they were like treating symptoms, but not really trying to investigate or delve deeper into, is it really that? Or is it something else? And so for 14 years, I had these medical nuances and symptoms that just were not explainable with arthritis and my injuries and whatnot. And finally, in 2014, I connected with an amazing neurologist and a rheumatologist who specialized in treating people with fibromyalgia, and a pain management specialist who also had a lot of patients with fibromyalgia. And these 3 were independent of each other. And they all came to the conclusion, or they all diagnosed me with fibromyalgia, and then they all concluded through my timeline of symptoms going that they started after that military vehicle accident, that we started to see a crop of these symptoms, while mild and inconvenient, and then progressing and getting worse over time. And then after I was officially diagnosed with fibromyalgia in 2014 is when I found out on my mother's side of the family that I am one of 6 individuals on my mom's side of the family, biological family members, diagnosed with fibromyalgia. And I just was like, hey, would have been great to know all this. So I didn't spend all this time like thinking I was losing my mind or whatnot. But again, some of it was a generational thing, but people weren't open about talking about their medical health issues or history. And so that was part of parlaying my experience into awareness and advocacy initiatives and cultivating discussions like on social media or at conferences or on podcasts, and normalizing talking about it, because it helps people feel less alone and validate them. And also it creates a space where people can speak freely in a space that is judgment free and share these experiences because it can help someone else. And honestly, if I would have known I had so many family members diagnosed with fibromyalgia, I probably would have said to the doctors, hey, what about this years ago? I have all these family members that have it. So I had 2 identified, I guess, triggers of increased risk of developing fibromyalgia: the injuries, the subsequent surgeries, and that it ran on my mother's side of the family. And then a handful of years ago, I found out that I was one of 3 diagnosed on my biological father's side of the family.
So does the VA consider that service related or hereditary?
Well, they don't say fibromyalgia. It's not it's not classified as a genetic condition. So let me kind of preface it this way. If prostate cancer runs in your family, that increases your risk of getting prostate cancer. Same thing with diabetes, same thing with breast cancer. So no, now should there be research to see if there's a congenital or genetic component to fibromyalgia? Absolutely. But there are medical conditions that have components of both. So like there are breast cancer being one, there are some forms of it that are genetic or congenital. And then some forms of breast cancer that are not. There are heart conditions like cardiomyopathy where it's congenital, a genetic disposition, but then you could develop cardiomyopathy for other reasons that are not congenital. So no, it's really, it gets kind of lost in the wash with the Veteran Affairs. It's really only been over like the past, I would say 7 years that we're seeing the perception of fibromyalgia change as far as service connection for it. It was really not till like 2016, 2017 that the VA Veteran Affairs said, oh, yeah, if you have Gulf War illness and you develop fibromyalgia, that's a presumptive condition. However, it's expanded since then, where there are certain circumstances within the military and the VA that if you develop fibromyalgia based on certain regions you were deployed to, I don't have the whole list, but like, was it Southeast Asia, Iraq, and Syria, and Egypt, and Afghanistan, and Kuwait, and there's some more on there. There's a few more on that list. Like if you were there and you develop fibromyalgia, it's considered presumptive. If there are certain medical conditions that you develop that are considered service connected and you develop fibromyalgia, they'll consider it presumptive to that initial condition. PTSD is one. I've seen people who develop, veterans, they develop and diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome or one of the plethora of Gulf War related illnesses, and then they get service connected for that, and then they develop fibromyalgia. So then you have to go back and file a claim for fibromyalgia secondary to that primary service connected condition, if that makes sense. So is the Veteran Affairs where it should be as far as making it more easy or accessible to be service connected for fibromyalgia? Yes. But is it where it should be? No, because veterans will still fight. I've seen veterans who said, I literally had copies of my order in my VA claim for fibromyalgia that showed that I was in whatever, Iraq, or Egypt. And it's considered a presumptive condition if I served in this region, and they get denied. And it's like, well, the VA raters don't necessarily go through all that. And I'm like, you need to resubmit, put that copy on top, have a letter writing out like, hey, this is when I was diagnosed, this is where I served. Like you have to spell it out for them in this case with fibromyalgia. And so it's the process. I don't want to say like the VA's understanding. I don't want to necessarily say, because we see this in the private healthcare system, is the understanding and support and treatment options for fibromyalgia better than it was 20 years ago? Yes. But is that anything to celebrate? No, because it's not where it should be. And that all goes back to the lack of specific driven research funding for fibromyalgia. So going through my whole experience, I coined the term hybrid healthcare as a veteran. I go to the VA for some things, but for other things like fibromyalgia and some of the other stuff and like surgeries I've had to get, I've gone to private healthcare on my own accord. A few times I've gone through the community care program through the VA because I was like, I don't feel like paying for this surgery that I had to fix the discs in my neck. But so I've experienced being a patient with fibromyalgia through the private healthcare sector and the VA. hybrid healthcare, and the barriers and lack of understanding and validation and support equally yoke. It's lacking. Is it better than what it was? Yes. But is it where it should be? Absolutely not. And we have a major crisis in healthcare right now through both the private sector and veteran affairs, that we don't have enough specialists. We do not have a lot of specialists. And then what happens is the primary care providers brunts the burden of treating people with complex medical conditions, from fibromyalgia to autoimmune disorders to neurological disorders. So we're kind of left in the fray because we don't, on top of the lack of funding for research on fibromyalgia, that leads to lack of understanding, and it leads to no pathways of treatment development for this medical condition, and then the lack of specialists, and then we're only interfacing with primary care. Like we're having a struggle in both private healthcare and veteran affairs healthcare systems being referred to a rheumatologist. Like rheumatology doesn't want to see us anymore because they're like, oh yeah, it doesn't fall under rheumatology, and they say fibromyalgia is a neurological condition. They just don't know what kind. And yet neurologists are like, well, so, and then pain management specialists. So we kind of go through this whole plethora of different providers, or not being able to get referred, because I always say fibromyalgia is the F word of the medical community. Because through the National Institutes of Health, it's like, okay, they have us under neurological conditions, but they don't have the specific category assigned to fibromyalgia. So because we're not assigned to and the specific or correct category, we're just left in limbo. And so yeah, it is a struggle. And some of the things through that experience is, I'll speak about, whether it's on podcasts or post on social media or present at conferences or speaking, with congressional representatives and senators, that not only presenting all these issues with fibromyalgia and the barriers that we contend with, and how the lack of funding has caused lack of development of treatments that target the root cause versus managing symptoms. And that in the process of all that, we have a lot of our patient rights that are impeded or violated. And so I'm like, okay, so do educational awareness piece on patient rights and present on that topic many times over. Or speaking or putting out written outlines for veterans on how to strengthen your claim for fibromyalgia, and looking at key points and where to, like, if it's going to be a secondary condition or a presumptive condition, whatnot, what have you. So yeah, I mean, I know I sound really kind of nerdy and said a lot without necessarily saying anything specific, but
well, I know that forever, the VA did not have chiropractic care for veterans. And thanks to guys like Dr. Novelli out of Canton, the VA now has chiropractic care. Do you know who Dr. Novelli is?
Personally do not.
With the Patriot Project?
Yes. I mean, personally not have met him, but have obviously heard of him. And the other thing is that the Veteran Affairs will provide chiropractic care for people with fibromyalgia. So that's part of the reason why I do know of his efforts that brought about the chiropractic care through the Veteran Affairs.
Well, squeaky wheel gets the grease. Maybe eventually they'll have what you need at the VA.
Hopefully. But that takes a lot of advocacy, which kind of goes into well, you've seen me speak to congressional representatives before and about different
Nancy Mace. How about Nancy Mace? She's doesn't she have something to do with the VA now?
I'm a little bit behind on the reading, so I
thought I saw that she is on the some kind of VA committee, but I could be wrong.
Like the VA House of Representatives committee in Congress?
Probably, yes.
or one of the special projects that they do. Um, but yeah, like through this, for both veteran issues and fibromyalgia, I do speak quite a bit with congressional staffers and Congress themselves, individuals in Congress, including our own congressional representative here in Ohio District 7, senators, speaking with their staff or speaking with them directly. Sometimes it's just phone calls. Sometimes it's setting up virtual meetings, sometimes in-person meetings, and sometimes doing being a part of a group of advocates, setting up meetings in DC or virtually, and having an advocacy day specific for fibromyalgia, and sharing a little bit of our experience and how the lack of funding has compounded our ability to have quality of life, the lack of understanding of what the root cause of fibromyalgia is leads to not having, I don't want to say, I would say more specific targeted treatment approaches for fibromyalgia versus just treating or masking the symptoms. So yeah, and then I also will meet with these same people, their staff or themselves, about veterans issues, including presenting issues. I had the opportunity to present an issue to the Secretary of the VA in May of 2024. With some of the systemic issues of the issues with the delivery of the telehealth medicine services to veterans. So I don't know if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, I've got a whole list of things that I want to talk about. That's on there.
Oh, okay. So for my own, again, I always say like the most powerful thing is your story. Your story is what can be the change for yourself and other people. Like it could start the ball rolling. So I prefer to do telehealth medical appointments when I can. And starting in July of 2021, I had a telehealth appointment and my provider literally didn't show. And like I called and I said, hey, my appointment was at 8:30 a.m. telehealth, and it's been 20 minutes and like they haven't even connected. And the admin staff were like, oh, that's odd. And they rescheduled my appointment for 3 weeks later. Well, it happened again, same provider, they didn't connect for my appointment. Like they were no calling, no showing me my scheduled telehealth medical appointment. But what happened was that 3 weeks later was August of 2021, and I needed a medication refill and I ran out. And when this telehealth provider did not maintain my appointment again, I called the Parma VA and I said, hey, this happened 3 weeks ago. They're not connecting for my appointment. They're not here. I'm sitting here. And that's when I found out they said, oh, they've been having problems with the system, like not being able to connect. I'm like, okay, well, I'm about to run out of this medication, which I really needed a refill put in 3 weeks ago when I initially had this appointment. Now I'm going to run out. And I talked to several people in the department, and all I got was the runaround. I said, I just, is there someone there? Is there a licensed prescriber there that could send this over for me? Just a 1 month refill. Nothing, crickets. I called a pharmacy and they were fantastic. They were sending messages. They were calling. It was 6 business days before they got a response from my provider to fill this medication. And what happened was I ran out of this medication. And by the time it was filled and I got it, it was over 2 weeks. And it was a medication for my anxiety. So that was fun. And then it happened again in August of 2023. My provider did not maintain, they could not provide the service, of my medical care through telehealth. It failed again. So I said, okay, I had 3 incidents where 3 times I had a provider at the VA not provide my medical care through my scheduled telehealth medical appointment. And after kind of digging a little deeper, I come to find out that it was a technical issue. And so I have Veteran Voices for Fibromyalgia in my organization. So I have team leaders. So I have team leaders, team members, and Patriot supporters. So everybody can have a role and support and assist and where they feel comfortable. But I have team leaders that have areas of expertise that I do not have. I might be relatively intelligent, but I'm also intelligent enough to surround myself with people with skill sets that I don't have or areas of knowledge that I don't understand. So one of my team leaders, Anudata, she is my expert go-to person for technology and network systems, all the virtual stuff. And she has hands-on experience both within the VA and outside the VA with these telehealth services. And she identified, oh, this is a real problem. One problem is it's a person error. When these providers are not able to connect, they sometimes, like you have to put in what they call a ticket of the issue, and they will select the wrong, like they choose the wrong kind of drop down answer of what the issue is. So then IT gets it thinking it's a problem in one area, but what it is something else. So that's a human error issue. The other issue identified by Anu is that the VA originally contracted with a technology company to build basically the base or foundation for the telehealth services for the VA. But then that technological company went out of business. They went bankrupt. So another tech company came in and took over. But instead of uninstalling the initial like software for the telehealth programming, they just built on top of it. So it's kind of like, I don't know, we're familiar with Legos and Tonka toys. So Tonka has what they call building blocks, and Lego calls them Legos. And if they're ever left on the floor anywhere and you're barefoot and you step on them, they both hurt equally, right? But they don't necessarily function the same all the time. So you could take a Lego and some of the building blocks from Tonka and they fit together fine. Then you have some you have to kind of push them together, they fit, but with the fight. And then you have some that don't fit at all. They don't work. That's kind of how the telehealth system is. They started building it with Lego, and then another company comes in and says, well, we have Tonka, so we're going to just use our stuff. And so obviously that's going to lead to technological issues. Then on the other side is the subpar response from the VA when, even though it's not their fault, the technology has failed, it is on their shoulders that there was no follow-up, especially when a veteran such as myself ran out of meds. So I thought, okay, so this is a problem. Let me investigate this. And I put out an independent poll, ran it for about 4 weeks for veterans. So it was a veteran driven poll. And I asked, hey, have you ever had a provider not provide you the telehealth appointment you were scheduled for? Were you in need of medication refills? Did you run out of medications as a result? Or if you were in need of refills, were you able to circumvent it another way to get your refills in the interim? And what this independent poll found was 62% of veterans reported that their medical provider failed or was unable to provide them their medical appointment as scheduled through telehealth. And 51 or 53% of those veterans polled said they ran out of medication as a result. And like about 25% said they were in need of medication refills, but they were able to circumvent it. So while it was I would say a small independent poll, it was just to see, is my experience happening with other people, other veterans? And lo and behold, it is. So it was like a little over 500 responses of veterans across the US just to kind of get a sample. And I was like, well, even if you take in a margin of error and say, let's say there's a 20% error in this, right? Margin of error. That's a big margin I'm given. I know a lot of people listening don't do research or not been in that space, and I have, but there's always a margin of error with research. So with this, I'm like, okay, let's say it's 20%. So of those 62% of veterans reporting that their provider didn't provide their telehealth medical appointment, if we put in a margin of error of 20, that's still 42% of veterans not receiving it. And if you say, apply that margin of error, and that's a big margin of error, mind you, it's usually not that big, but if you apply that to how many veterans ran out of medication, that drops down to 33%. That's not okay either. So those are, I mean, it really should be zero, but we're not gonna ever be at zero. There's always going to be some issues, but it should not, even with a margin of error of 20%, be that large. That's like saying, hey, 50, 1/3 of the veterans are not receiving their medical care, which diminishes continuity of care and their overall mental health and physical health outcomes, and 1/3 are not receiving their medications as a result. And that's taking in the margin of error. If right. The margin of error would probably be closer to like 8%, but I always like to go bigger and say it's still, when I put in this huge margin of error, it's still a very pervasive major issue. So 2 issues is the technology failure, but also the response of the VA providers and the VA as a whole. Like, this is a 2-ended issue, and technology fails. We know this. But our response to that failure needs to do better. And I did speak to several staffers for senators that were serving on the VA Senate committee at the time. Presented it to our congressional representative, and then I had the opportunity to present this in person to the Secretary of the VA. And it is. And one of those things of, it wasn't, hey, this is my problem. I never say, hey, this is an issue, fix it. I'm like, technology is going to fail. We know this, but this is my experience. This is what happened to me. And I thought, let me investigate and let me look and see if this is happening to other veterans. And lo and behold, here's the numbers. And when you provide that factual, tangible information of, it's not just me, and this is kind of a problem, even with this small sample, and you provide a really big margin of error, more than you need to, it's still like, it's like, what if one of those veterans was in a mental health crisis? What if they were suicidal? What if they had diabetes or a heart condition and they ran out of their meds? Like, these are life-threatening issues for a lot of veterans if they don't get these medications as a result of technology failing. But there's no response plan in place to address when these systemic issues happen. So then we sit back and we go, well, why don't veterans trust the VA? Why is the rates of suicide so high? Why are the outcomes? Why is our life expectancy lower than the general average of people in the US? Why are our physical health outcomes lower than the general population in the US? I'm like, this is one of many variables that contributes to this. And this is something that I feel is a pretty significant issue, where if you're using a system that isn't working and you're not being able to provide medical care, and veterans are running out of their medications, which is detrimental to their mental and or physical health, that's a problem. And those variables contribute to suicide risk, to our physical and mental health outcomes, to our life expectancy. And so it's just a small thing, and I don't blame anybody, whereas I expect them to come up with a reactionary response plan when this stuff happens, look at the technology and improve it. That's where we need to go, instead of saying, you suck, VA, fix it. That's a problem. Blah, blah, blah. Like, no, I'm like, because this would happen sometimes too in private healthcare. So it's just a matter of how your story can be the precipice of positive change, but also your book of life can become someone else's survival guide. And so that's why I'm really open with these experiences and my health, or sharing, opening my platforms so other people, both veterans and civilians, can share their medical experience or their health experiences, whether they have fibromyalgia or some other chronic condition or mental health condition, because our story are the seeds that are planted for the root of change down the road.
So what advice would you give a veteran that's struggling with fibromyalgia?
Well, so advice. The biggest thing I would say is you really have to know the resources to follow and read up on. I do have a blog on my website. I typically blog updates and stuff.
What is your website?
It's Veteran Voices for Fibromyalgia.
Okay. So
Um,
anybody that wants to check it out.
yes, but so my advice is you have to become an educated patient. You have to know what your patient rights are and also understand how to improve your ability to advocate an appointment. So I'm going to give you a quick example. There are times both at the Veteran Affairs and private healthcare systems where you say, hey, something's not right. I'll give examples for myself. So my knees, my hips, my back, my neck, yeah, I'm all messed up. So my knees are messed up. I've already had surgery on my right knee and my right hip. I'm gonna have to get surgery again on my right hip. I don't know, probably hip replacement. But it's been a while since I've had MRIs done on my knees. It's actually been 10 years, and I've been having problems with my knees, a lot of clicking. It feels like something's catching in there. I have a history of torn cartilage in my knee. So I'm feeling like, and I've had this before, and I'm guessing there's some tearing and it's catching in the joint, right? And I ask my provider at the Veteran Affairs, it has been 10 years. I am service connected for both my knees. It's getting worse. I feel it catching, and that's what it was doing before I had this surgery, which tells me it could be likely that I have some more tissue or cartilage that's torn somewhere else and it's catching in the joint with the range of motion of walking or doing whatever. Can we get an MRI? And they're like, well, we'll do an X-ray. And I'm like, okay, that's great. An X-ray doesn't show soft tissue stuff. Like, that's what this is. Like, I'm, not to, I didn't say this, but in my head, I'm like, I'm the patient. This is my body. I'm like the expert. Like, I've been through this before. So they did do an X-ray instead of MRI. And then I said, okay, can we get the MRI? And they were like, well, we just don't see the need. And I'm like, okay, let me go over my issues again. And then when the provider still refused to put in basically a consular order for MRI, I said, okay, that's fine. Under patient rights, we have federally protected patient rights, which are adopted by the states under the revised codes of patient rights. So we're both based in Ohio. It's the Ohio Revised Code of Patient Rights. Under those rights, one of them is you have the right to appropriate and timely access to care, which also includes ordering tests, labs, whatnot, what have you. I feel a legitimate reason. I have a history here with my knees and have had this problem before, which kind of, was part of the reason to have surgery on my right knee to begin with 25 years ago. Haven't had MRIs done in 10 years. I'm having these problems again, which were what led to having knee surgery, and they're refusing this. And then I just kindly said, okay, would you mind documenting in my medical chart that I requested an MRI and that you're not going to put the order in? So that's yes. Mm-hmm. So, and I have on my blog, I have a link and where I presented on patient rights. It's a video that I presented it for the National Fibromyalgia Health Organization on your patient rights, knowing what your patient rights are. I gave real life, my personal experience from both a patient perspective and a healthcare professional experience, a perspective of patient rights violations that I incurred or I observed in the patients that I was supporting. And then I give tips on different ways to circumvent those things or how to improve your outcomes of your appointment by knowing your patient rights and how to communicate or speak the language to get your healthcare needs met and that kind of stuff. So, I mean, that's a whole hour topic in itself. But that's just an example of using my personal experiences and my professional experience, bringing it together. Here's your patient rights, black and white, written out, speak about it. Here are some examples of what I observed from a professional standpoint and a patient standpoint of experiencing patient rights violations. Here's what I did in all those circumstances. And here are some tips for you to improve the outcome of your medical appointments, like just different things. Like if you can have someone go with you to your appointments, whether in person or virtual. So there's like a whole thing. So I do a lot of these educational, informational, awareness initiatives to help educate veterans and patients alike, to strengthen their, so they have more tools in their toolbox, so that they can advocate more effectively for themselves. And then doing the advocacy part on a state and federal level, in hopes to improve or reshape some of VA policy, or legislation to protect. And some of it could be specific to veterans and fibromyalgia, but some of it can be more inclusive, like including, where it's geared towards people with disabilities or chronic conditions or chronic pain, and fibromyalgia and veterans fall within the scope of all that. So it's a nerdy way of living and being.
Well, you're still an inspiration.
Oh, I appreciate that. I don't know about it being an inspiration, but I also will say it's not without the support of a lot of people, whether they're like hands-on or they're kind of providing secondary supports. So a lot of times I tell people, like, behind an awareness initiative or like an awareness or advocacy like movement, I tell people all the time, I'm like, okay, yeah, you see my face, here I am, right? But there's a lot of people behind me holding me up or doing all these things behind the scenes to make these initiatives come to light or be more successful, or, like I said, having team leaders that have areas of expertise that can give me the language and the information to strengthen that advocacy initiative. So it's not like I'm just this one person band. I mean, they're the foundation. Without them, there's not me doing these things. So yeah.
I gotcha. So when you were in the Army, and I have a bunch of questions, just women in the military in general. So did you have any unique challenges as a female in the Army? I mean, how did the guys treat the female soldiers? Were you an equal? Were you
I can only speak from my personal experience and observation, but we find that this is kind of through research through the Department of Defense and Veteran Affairs, and now like Brown University came out with a pretty robust research study last month. So being a female in a predominantly male space is a very different experience, especially in the military. I will say I received a lot of compliments on my physique or how I looked. I was hit on a lot. I've had things that were said that really are not appropriate to say in general. There were times, not always. I had some really great male service members that I served with that were top speed, just they were great. But there were some not so much. But the ones that were great treated me as an equal. it's just one of those things, like, we kind of go in knowing that we're going to probably have experience of being hit on, objectified, being
Sexual harassment.
sexual harassment. I mean, I have some of my own stories, and then I also have there was an investigation at Fort Leonard Wood that I was brought into the Inquisition and asked a lot of questions. It didn't affect me personally, but yeah, sexual harassment in my time in the military. So now they have this term called MST, or military sexual trauma, but that didn't exist when I was serving, right?
Mhm.
But yeah, a lot of inappropriate, like, sexualized jokes. I had one NCO, non-commissioned officer, uh was very forthright and said that my time would be easier while in the Army if I had a sexual relationship with him. And I said, "Hmm, I shall pass." And I'm just a very upfront person, and no, understanding that sometimes I mean, like, seriously, I was just like, oh, y'all don't know me very well yet. That's okay.
Mm.
You will. Um, I did observe some very coercive, inappropriate interactions of men towards my fellow female soldiers. And I'm not the type of person that can observe something and not say anything. I had one situation where, and I'm not saying that all men in the military are bad. I'm not. I'm not. But
Sure.
there are times where certain environments or situations can cultivate an environment that isn't conducive for different groups of people. And in this case, we're talking about women members. So there was a issue with a sergeant that had was being abusive towards a female soldier. They were dating, and she kept on trying to break it off. And he was in a position where he could coerce her, like, he could have hurt her career, basically. uh there was issues with physical abuse. I mean, it was like verbal abuse. There was just all this stuff going on, and that this female being essentially forced into this relationship, and because, like, being threatened by this sergeant with Article 15s because he wasn't getting his way or whatever it was. And come to find out that this was a pattern of behavior he had done with other females. And it got to the point, and you know me well enough that I'm well spoken, and I just, I'm always, I've had people say, like, oh, there's some time, like, they're like, like, if you say something, you could end up a victim in this situation. I was like, it is what it is. But it got to the point where it was so pervasive that I literally went in, and everybody heard me. And I started going off on this sergeant. And I'm talking about going off. I can't remember everything I said, but from what I understand, it was pretty epic because
Hmm.
lots of people heard it. And I was yelling at him. I was like, who do you think you are? I don't care who your father is. I don't care what your rank is. You will not put hands on a woman, whether civilian, military service member. You're not going to threaten any of these women that they have to have sex with you, or you're going to find a way to give them an Article 15, or you're going to put some obstacles in the way of their promotion. You're not going to do this. It is not happening. Like, it is not happening anymore. Now, mind you, this is 2000. So this is all before 2001. This is all before military sexual trauma was identified. Like, this is an issue. So, I mean, but I can't. Once I'm like, no. Once I'm like, no, we're not doing this to our own. You're not doing this to my own, because you're not part of us acting like this. So, ooh, I'm getting fired now just talking about it. And it's been 24 years. In that interaction, he grabbed the collar of my BDU like this. And he was like, "Hey, Kent, hey, let me ask you something. Are you a lipstick lesbian under that uniform, or are you a dyke under that uniform?" And I was just like, "Let me tell you something."
Mm.
But I had to get carried out by the first sergeant.
Wow.
Because it was not because I was going to get physical, but they knew. And I was just like, I am not backing down. Let him lay hands on me. Let him get so mad. Let's do this. Let's get witnesses. I was all about it. Go ahead, punch me. Go ahead, punch me. Do it. Like, and I got lifted out. And the funny thing is, the first sergeant was shorter than me. So I'm like, he's like, do. It was pretty comical. From what I understand, because I mean, I was just like, I've had enough. I'm like, and I'm going off. I'm like, you MFers just think you could come in here and grab our butts and do this, try to force us to have sex with you. You think that you own us, like then you try to threaten us if you don't get your way and blah blah blah. And again, not every man has done this that I've served with or that I've observed. But all it takes is one to create that environment that is unsafe. And it's not just unsafe for the women, because these things that happen, it impedes their ability for readiness for deployment and combat and mission. It causes interference with our ability to complete our mission, to carry out our mission. So it affects everybody. I don't even know how I didn't get an Article 15. Like I said, I didn't touch anybody. I was yelling. I can be very colorful. I don't get angry. I get irritated. I get annoyed. I get frustrated. Angry is a whole other level with me. And I've been told it's kind of scary. It's so very rare, but I was angry. And I guess I was making up stuff that was like, they were like, it was so intense. But the thing of it is that was weird is walking away from that. The irony of it is like that unspoken word, like, damn, Kent, she just went full force. And a lot of people were like, oh, and then to come find out, the fallout was a lot of people knew this was going on. But I was the one that decided to scream about it in front of the entire company.
Somebody had to do it.
Sounds like. And here's the thing, I'm not recommending that. That is something, whether in civilian sector, military, veteran, I'm not recommending you do that. It can be dangerous. It can be dangerous. Like I could have gotten hurt. Who knows where this person. But here's the thing is there was no investigation done. This sergeant was told, like, you need to stay away from these identified females. Like, hypothetically speaking, if that was in today's day and age under the current regulations, the DOD and Department of the Army and military sexual trauma, there is the groundwork to address this. But we're seeing that we still see this as a pervasive problem where 1 out of 3 women military service members are subjected to and survive some form of military sexual trauma. And then
1 out of 3?
Yes.
Wow.
This is the DOD's own report, which came out in 2019. Since then, Veteran Affairs had to, I don't want to say testify, but kind of testify, present to Congress, Congressional VA Committee and whatnot back in, hold on, let me get my bearings here. It was June or July of 2020. I actually watched it. Their research found that 1 out of 4 women accessing Veteran Affairs facilities, whether it's a female employee, a female visitor, a female that works for a vendor like Pepsi or something, putting food in the machines, or a female veteran, are subjected to behaviors and interactions that fall under the definition of military sexual trauma.
Wow.
1 out of 4. And then we're seeing this behavior in veteran-specific organizations and veteran-specific events, including veteran organizations that are chartered by Congress. But there's not been any research on that yet. So here's the thing. We have these regulations and stuff in place to circumvent MST and to address the aggressors or perpetrators of sexual violence. And not to say that men in the military don't experience it. It's 1 out of 50. I've actually assisted 3 male veterans with their VA claims for MST. So I don't want to leave them out of the fray. It does happen. And I feel like it probably happens to men in the service more often than 1 out of 50. But if we see how difficult it is for military service members and women veterans to come out and report it, imagine how it is for a male service member or veteran. But so like we've laid the groundwork to address these things, but we continue to see this pervasive behavior in the military, at the veteran fairs, at veteran specific events. And that kind of is one of the things that I speak on because yes, by definition of military sexual trauma, I experienced that. Now, am I a survivor of sexual assault? No, I didn't have that happen, but I've had other inappropriate things. I don't know. I don't like the term like even sexual assault. Like I call it sexual violence because it is a form of violence towards someone.
Right.
So to say that I, experienced sexual assault or rape, that didn't happen. But other things, yes. I've been touched inappropriately, things said inappropriately, creating an environment that's like sexually hostile or coercive, and it's just like I just want to come in and do my job and not have to worry about being hit on or feeling this unsaid pressure to do something for a male counterpart, right?
Right.
But the fact that it's still happening in this day and age, it is a huge problem. And every time we take 3 steps forward in legislation or VA policy or military, it's like 10 steps back. So I do, in a sense, I do speak about these issues affecting veterans who are survivors of MST, and have in a few instances where those individuals were comfortable sharing the story, gave them that space for it. But I do speak about that a lot, and I do get a lot of heat for it. I get some clapbacks, and I was like, look, I'm like, you could believe it happens or not. And if you don't want to believe these experiences, let me tell you about, I could tell another situation at Fort Leonard Wood where there was an investigation that I got questioned for that falls under the scope of this topic. I mean, it's up to you. I don't know if it's kind of in depth, but yeah, I don't know what was happening. I was just my own business, moving along, like, can't, just doing my job. And then
Right.
one day we're told like, hey, we're going to have to meet with the brigadier general. I was like, what's going on here? And they're like, there's an investigation underway, some concerns with a couple of our service members. That's all we were told. So later that day, I'm sitting one-on-one with this brigadier general, and I'm being asked questions, in particular of this lower ranking female soldier. I didn't really know her. In passing, I knew her. Like that, I never had an issue with her. I never heard any one complain about her, nothing. Like she was squared away. And so I was like, what's going on here? Well, the line of questioning was trying to figure out this brigadier general. And I was on there for almost an hour telling them essentially nothing because I really didn't know nothing, but there's a takeaway, but they were trying to figure out. So from what I gathered and was given enough details by this brigadier general is that there was some interaction going on with this private, an E2, and this E7 sergeant. So there's like this whole rule, like no fraternization, blah, 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 blah. the whole rank thing. And this female, my understanding, was still like in training for something, or was there for training. I don't know. So all I know is that the story was this female was going off base with this sergeant several occasions. That's all I know. I was like, look, I make it my business not to know other people's business. And that's why I don't know what the business is that's we're talking about right now. So that's just kind of how I am. Um, what was interesting about the question was this, I don't know, inquisition. It was intense. And I'm sitting there in front of this brigadier general, and he's just grilling me. And I'm like, I don't even know what's going on. I'm like, look, I just come in, do my job, go for the day. I'm done. But through this trial of questioning, because that's what it felt like, and I'm like, what am I like? Like I was treated like I did something wrong. That's how I felt. Mm-hmm. And plus I wasn't giving answers that were satisfying this general. And I was like, I was just like, sir, I don't know what to tell you. Like I said, I come in, the only thing that's my business is whether things get done or not while on duty. That's it. Like I don't get involved in people's personal life. I don't care. But it was geared towards, it was just so weird. Like the way it was presented to me was, it was her fault that this was going on. But she didn't have a car. So how did she get off base with this sergeant multiple times, multiple documented times, supposedly? Did we know of anybody that had a problem with this sergeant, other females? And I was just like, not going to say his name, but I was like, well, yeah, I mean, he kind of flirts with everybody. I'm like, it's just one of those things. I just kind of raise my eyebrow at him and like, whatever. And I walk away. Like he flirts, or I said, just really complimenting females that I just don't know. It's not that it's inappropriate, but I don't think it's appropriate because of his rank. So that was all I could contribute to it. But the general undertone was they were looking at it being her fault of what was going on. And I just couldn't understand that. I'm like, he's the one with the vehicle. He's the one with off-base housing. Like none of this makes sense. And all I know is that a few weeks later, she was no longer there, but she was gone. So I don't know what happened. I don't know if they were like out processing her. I don't know what the outcome was, but she wasn't there, but he was. And back then, that's totally military sexual trauma, but it wasn't defined. It wasn't addressed back then. It's just a very weird space to be in. But to be fair, okay, because a lot of people are like, oh, well, Kristal's bashing men in the military. I am absolutely not. I know men that I've served with or that I'm friends with who have said, I will take a bullet for you. And it's this same, like they're like family, right? Brothers from another mother, right? But to be fair, I've experienced this in the civilian sector. Sure. And I'm not saying I'm all that in a bag of chips. I'm no spring chicken. I'm almost a half century old, so I'm not saying I'm all that. But when you're in spaces where essentially I'm the minority, right? And some of my professional experience, I'm only one of a handful of females. And in certain spaces, I'm one of a few females. Sometimes I'm the only one. And so it's like, yeah, there are going to be times in the civilian sector too that it happens. Should it happen? No. But it does. I stand up for myself. I do say things. And I usually try to make it in a way where it's sarcastic, so it's not going to escalate a situation, but rather diffuse it. But yeah, and so when you're looking at this, and the way I look at it is this, I'm like, whether you want to believe women service members or women veterans, whether this happened or not, because there's a lot of naysayers. But I'm like, okay, if you're in the military, though, whether you believe it or not, let's look at the overall picture here and how this will affect our mission.
Right.
And so at the end of the day, yes, it's a pervasive problem. Is there policy and legislation that's been put in place to address or alleviate? Yes. Is it good enough? No. Is it working fast enough? No. Are women, well, veterans as a whole, like I said, I know men who are survivors of military sexual trauma. Is it a little bit easier now for them to get service connected compensation? Yes. Is it perfect? No. It's still a fight. It's re-traumatizing these victims. And they need a better system for them to share their experience without them constantly reliving it to get the benefits that they deserved, right? Even if there's full documentation and there's reports and the veteran has the report, they still have to I was just like, but this is documented black and white. Like, you're going to subject this veteran. And one of those veterans was a male veteran. A male veteran. And I just was so angry about that. I said, okay, let's talk to the patient. Let's talk to this. Let's talk, let's reach out to your congressional representative. There's got to be a way. Like, you have reports, like military reports. So I was just like, I don't understand, like, why they're going to make you sit down. I said, the only other thing I can think of is that you sit down with someone who you trust, who literally you tell them your story and they pull up their laptop and it's talk to text, and then that person goes through and edits these experiences you had so that it's concise and in written form. I just don't in there's circumstances like that I know of, like all the written documentation is there and they still subject the veteran to retelling their trauma. And there's a lot of after effect. And I've been on the phone with a few who went through their compensation and pension examination for service connection for military sexual trauma. And I'm talking about hours. And I don't mind it. But it is a highlight of how we need to do better for these veterans so that they're not essentially being re-traumatized and re-victimized again.
Well, with that said, I mean, there's been a lot of talk in the last couple of weeks about women in combat roles. What's your opinion on that? Just out of curiosity.
I mean, I really don't have an opinion because since the revolution, women have been in combat roles. It's just that we're only been recognized in recent years. And there's, 6888, great movie on Netflix. While they weren't in combat roles, they were in combat zones and they did take some heat. Hello, Girls. I don't know if you know about all that and all the decades long it took for them to get the recognition and like the VA benefits and all that stuff. We're talking about decades. So Hello, Girls. I do think that's on YouTube, but it's a documentary of all the women serving in the Army Corps who were our telephone operators. And they're a target.
But the question, I think,
but their communication goes down. We're screwed. They're in a combat zone. They might not be on the front line holding an M15 or M16, but they're still there relaying information to allow the combat mission to go forward. You have Megan Levy. She was a Marine with her military canine detecting IEDs. That's combat. You have Courage Under Fire. That's another movie. Megan Levy, that's the name of the movie. You can watch that. Courage Under Fire. These are examples of women who were in combat zones, who were taking fire and giving fire, returning fire, I should say. And the thing of it is that you're going to be in, I think you said earlier outside of this, that you're going to be in DC later in the year. If you have time, go to the International Spy Museum and you'll see how many women have been in combat roles. Some of them in Revolutionary War dressing up as a man. We've been in those roles. So I don't,
they have.
I don't understand. I can't answer that question. Like, my whole thing is this. I was with the Combat Support Hospital. There are just certain particular military occupational jobs that you are at higher risk of being taken out. Because if the enemy can take out your Combat Support Hospital, you can't treat and save lives. That demoralizes the troops. My last job with my unit was tactical operations, the Tactical Operations Center, which oversees communication. If your communication lines go down, you're in trouble. You're in big trouble. So there's these jobs that we see a lot of women in: medical, communications, that kind of stuff. And guess what? The rules of war in this day and age, since Vietnam, do not apply. Take
Mhm.
out take out their bloodline. And these are women, a lot of women. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, they're strapped with the sidearm. They're ready to shoot if they need to be. Are they on the front lines? Are they infantry? No. But do
I
they
think, but see, that's what I think the conversation is about. Women serve a very, very valuable role in the military, but I think the debate or the conversation was, should women be in the front lines, on the front lines?
but we have been. Whether sanctioned or not, we have had women throughout
You
history,
it,
even in other countries too. But
mm,
going, the Revolutionary Wars one, the war, our conflicts with our First Nation tribes, our Native American tribal nations. There was women there on the front line taking heat and giving heat,
right.
and that's the
There's some
whole.
badass women out there.
I'm just saying.
Hmm.
And so when someone asks me as a women veteran, like, what about women on the front line? And I'm just like, I just feel like this is such a moot point because we have women that are in the Navy SEALs. We have women that are Green Berets. We have, like, we've been there. Whether you want to recognize it or not, we've been on the front lines one way or another. And a lot of those women are saving lives. A lot of those women have been taking fire, giving fire, returning fire, and they're in frontline positions, always have been. And it's well documented. And why it continues to be a conversation. I'm like frontline infantry. Okay. I'm not saying every woman in the military is built with that mindset. I'm not saying
Right.
any woman is, but for myself, I'm like, it is what it is. Is that where you need me? Okay. Oh, well, the rest of my body might be busted, but my trigger fingers aren't, those trigger fingers are just fine. But I just feel like it's such a nonsensical conversation because women have been on the front line. They have been in roles that are like, infantry and other supportive roles for infantry or in combat. I don't know. It's just such a weird question for me
Well,
to
what
answer.
about this? What do you think about the Army changing the names of some of the bases?
So I don't know. I know it doesn't bother me either way. And
No.
especially when you look at some of the history of the name, I'm like, ooh, I was like, a couple of them names, I'm like, yeah, they should go.
So what about this? What's something that's probably people don't is misunderstood about women in the Navy or in the
And,
military? I'm sorry, the Navy.
well, Navy, Air Force,
Yeah, yeah.
Marine, Army, that we
What?
can't carry our own weight.
Yeah. Now,
And
would you recommend women joining with all the stuff that you've been through or you've seen? You think it's a place for? Would
what
you, if you had
what
a daughter, would you tell your daughter, you know what? Yeah, join the Army or join the Marines
I mean,
or
I
the
would
Navy?
still go back and join if I had, hindsight in 2020. I'd still. But one of the things when I am asked that question a lot by women or daughters of my friend or just whatever, and I'll be like, "Look, go Air Force." Just go Air Force. Or I'll say, what is it that you want? But you also have to understand there's hazards to the job outside of potentially being shot at, and here's what they are. But here's how you protect yourself. This is what I've had those conversations with women that have wanted to join or having that conversation like which branch would be best suited for who they are. And I know some women, they're hardcore Marines.
Mm-hmm.
Love them to death. I'm like, I mean, they're badass. They're
Sure.
just they are. And I'm like, that's to each, their own. And I know a lot of women, not all, they have a family like mine who served in the military. These long lineage of generations that have been in the military, and multiple family members. And so for them, yeah, that's. But I also say, hey, there's more hazards in the military. Like, here's the full picture,
Right.
just so you know, and what you need to do, and make sure you have a buddy system and know who you can trust. But honestly, I worked community mental health, and I was in some areas that are really bad, lots of gang activity and drug
In the
activity.
military?
No, in the civilian sector.
Oh.
And I would have to, at times, call police because I'm providing community mental health services to individuals in their community. And so, yeah, there's neighborhoods. And I was like, and a couple times I did have to call for support, like through the police and stuff. And they'd show up and they couldn't believe I wasn't wearing a bulletproof vest. They're like, I can't believe, and I said, look, I've had clients and patients in this area for years. And I said, they see me coming. I said, 9 times out of 10, the kids and teens and young adults are yelling, children's services. They go running in. They think I'm doing it. I said, 9 times out of 10, can I be at the wrong place at the wrong time? Absolutely. But it can happen anywhere. And 9 times out of 10, they see me, they know how I'm dressed and stuff. I'm there. Whether they think I'm like children's services or the court, and I said, regardless of how bad the area is, these are people too, and maybe having conversations with them to cultivate connection with. I said, I talk to people that are neighbors of my clients, just to be like, hey, what's up? How are you doing today? How's it going? Stay cool, keep warm, drink your water, whatever it is. But yeah, I've been in, and I have family members that are, and friends that are police or retired detectives, and they would be like, look, if you're stopped at a light and you see people approaching, just take off in that area. And if a cop sees you, if they pull you over, it might be because they think the car is hot, but you've got blonde hair, blue eyes, you're driving a yellow sedan, sport looking car. 9 times out of 10, they'll be like, we understand why she's doing that.
Right.
So I don't know. It's like certain things I've chosen to do in the military or my professional, personal career included being in places or spaces that are not necessarily safe. So whether it's because of the people or because of the environment, either way, but that's just kind of how I am. So when you ask, would I go back and do it again? Obviously, there's something ingrained in my personality that's like, hey, let's go there. The worst case scenario.
Yeah, I'd go back if they needed me.
Yeah, that's what I said. I'm like, I've always, but yeah, so there are questions. Now, I will be honest, when you said if someone's kid or whatever, daughter, there's a couple where I was like, no. But it was more about a personal thing. It's just certain things. Like there was 2 incidences where 2 individuals, I was like, the military ain't for you. Not this, because this is, and I said, if you wanna experience it, I can call up some people I know that can give you like a very light version of what your first day of training will be like. And the one person I did make arrangements, and they were like, nope, and they got nothing. They got no smoke, but
it's a psychological thing. If you're not ready for it, you won't last.
They were like, within an hour, they were like, I'm done. Because they got screamed at. I said, look, that's just how it is the first few weeks when you go to training. It gets better, but yeah, if you can't deal with that, then or wrap your head around that this is only temporary and they're breaking you down as a civilian to build you up as a military team. If you can't kind of look at the long run, it's not going to work for you. So
yeah, that's true. I have one last question for you, and I appreciate you taking this time to tell your story. I love it. So back to the fibromyalgia. So how can family and friends or the community better support veterans living with the conditions of fibromyalgia? Besides going to your website, which is
veteran or my social media channels. So yeah, my website is Veteran Voices for Fibromyalgia, and you can find me kind of just to go back a little bit. I used to have an actual blog called the Fibromyalgia Pain Chronicles when blogging was like the thing. But come 2017, I transitioned it, or I kind of closed it down basically, and transitioned it to social media platforms, Facebook, now Instagram, Threads, TikTok, LinkedIn. I don't know. I'm on some other ones I can't remember. YouTube. So on all social media platforms, you can find me at either the Fibromyalgia Pain Chronicles or Veteran Voices for Fibromyalgia. And then there's the website, Veteran Voices for Fibromyalgia. The biggest thing is So if you're on social media and you follow me, and I put out calls to action, which are typically call your congressional representatives or senators on this issue, and it'll be related to veterans or fibromyalgia or chronic illness or disability. Like those are some simple ways to help support veterans and non-veterans living with fibromyalgia and living with the other issues that come with that. The other thing is sometimes when we do legislative advocacy, especially if it's going to be virtual, put out on my social media channels, like if you want to join in. And the other thing is a lot of people think like, well, I'm not a veteran, so like my perspective doesn't matter, or I don't have fibromyalgia. I'm like, oh, but do you have a friend or family member or take care of someone who's a veteran or has fibromyalgia? Yeah, your perspective as a supporter or caregiver or family member does matter, because this causes multi-level impact on a variety of a person's support, family, and even professional systems. So that is the biggest thing. And I always tell people, check my blog. I don't blog a lot on my website. I don't even blog per se. It's updates, like what's going on, what we're working on. There are times where I'll share forms, like a format where you can send an automated message to your representatives or senators, asking them, encouraging them to vote a certain way on legislation. There are times where I will put out I'll do awareness videos on different on different platforms in different formats, like every November, which is Men's Health Awareness Month. Every year for the past 4 years, I've put together an awareness initiative to amplify the voices of men, both veterans and non-veterans, living with a variety of medical conditions, to help break the stigma and also elicit support and understanding for men. So there's times I put these things out on my website or social media channels, like here's some projects if you want to be involved in. Here is a legislative issue that's being presented to the congressional floor. Please, send an email. Here's the information. Or in some instances, I put out calls to action where I've actually scheduled events. And on that day of that event, that's when we put in the calls. So yeah, that's the biggest thing, is a lot of times on my social media channels is where you're going to find that stuff. The other thing is that if you don't necessarily understand what a veteran is facing, or what someone with fibromyalgia is facing, or a veteran with fibromyalgia, the best thing to say is like, I don't understand because I don't have your experiences or live with the condition, but I'm here to listen and support. And if you need me to go to a doctor's appointment because you're frustrated that the doctor's not listening, I can go with you as a witness and support system. And essentially, it's just recognizing that this condition is an invisible illness. A lot of times when people see me, I'm doing okay, but it's a balancing act. Every single day, I'm renegotiating what I'm going to do that day based on how I feel. Like I only have so much energy and wellness pennies. And people with fibromyalgia, we live in a constant state of unwellness, and it varies. But we're unwell all the time. But it doesn't always seem like we are unwell. And that's kind of one of the things that people have a hard time conceptualizing. So when you see me or someone such as myself, a veteran, because veterans have a lot of invisible medical conditions, PTSD, traumatic brain injuries, they've survived military sexual trauma, they have invisible illnesses like chronic fatigue syndrome, irritable bowel syndrome, fibromyalgia, you name it. We have a whole bunch of those. Tinnitus, ear ringing. Yes, we need to get that service connection for you.
I have it.
You do. Yeah. Okay, cool. So yeah, and tinnitus, it's like, oh, that's so aggravating. And people don't understand why we're frustrated and we leave loud spaces, because tinnitus gets worse when you're in a loud environment. It goes from E to E. You're like, oh, I got to go outside. It's too loud in here. So even though you're not experiencing it and you can't conceptualize it, it doesn't mean that that person who is telling you that I got to go outside, it's too loud because my tinnitus is screaming in my ear. You don't understand it. It's fine, but accept it and understand that while you don't know what it's like and it doesn't impact you, it's impacting the person. And I can tell you that tinnitus can sometimes hurt. Sometimes I've had it where it's gotten so loud and I'm just like, I got to remove myself from this noisy environment because it's making my tinnitus worse. There's times understanding that we might not be able to show at every event or social or family gathering, or we do and we leave early, or we have to schedule our social time with you. Because for people such as myself, we become so good at the craft of chronic illness that we know how to balance it out. And I'll say, people call me, most of my friends, I'm fortunate. I'm so fortunate. My inner circle, the majority of my friends, my mom, whatever, they understand that I have to schedule things out. And they still ask me last minute, but it's very rare I could do something last minute because I have to balance every day. So it's like I have like a schedule to see my friends or go do things with my mom. It's not like I'm like, hey, drop of a hat, let's go do this. It's kind of doesn't work that way from a physical aspect, because our body is, I don't know, it's like we're like a defunct cell phone battery that even when we plug it in overnight, it might, if we're lucky, charge to 70%, which is rare. Where a regular person's cell phone battery, it's 100% when they wake up. But a lot of times I'm like between 40 and 50%. And then sometimes when I'm in a flare up, it's like literally 20%. So we're never at full functioning. And then we're trying to manage and do everything else that is typical in everyday lives of everyday people because we have obligations, but we're doing so at a lesser effect. Like our bodies are running at a point where our energy is lower and our wellness pennies are deficient. And so just being understanding of that. It's hard to conceptualize. I know. Like I look like today I was kind of like, oh, I'm so like, ugh. But here I am. And this is my thing, that my major thing I'm going to do today. And then it is Saturday, so I'm going to kick back and chill. But yeah, just respect, you can't see what's going on, but understand and respect that while you can't see it or feel it, it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. Kind of like, the wind. You can't see it, but you can feel it. And that's how fibromyalgia is and other invisible illnesses. You can't see it, but I certainly can feel it.
Right. Well, I just want to thank you for doing this and sharing your story. Like we talked about, I'm going to submit it to the Library of Congress Veterans History Project, so they can preserve your memories forever. So I really appreciate you doing this with me. My first female veteran. So if I gave out awards, you would be getting one, but since I don't, but
you did though. You did. Listen, for your listeners. So listen, Joe's pretty awesome guy here. Was it last year? So you presented one of your hand-carved, handmade flags to Veteran Voices for Fibromyalgia for all of our advocacy and awareness initiatives to amplify the voices of veterans. And it's hanging very proudly and it gets a lot of compliments every time people will see it. So yeah, that is an award. I truly was honored to get that, especially coming from a fellow veteran. So yeah, it means a lot.
I love doing those for fellow veterans. It's obviously a passion of mine. Well, the veterans in general and veterans charities. So anything I can do, but this isn't, this podcast isn't about me. And I do appreciate you saying that, but, and I did particularly like your, the thing you did this past November with, men's stories, because you asked me to contribute. So, I appreciated that.
I appreciate you being trusting and willing enough, especially because I like to be able to represent all branches of the military alongside civilian men. And so I was super excited that you agreed to participate this year. he had a lot of great things to say, and it's all out on social media. Veteran Voices for Fibromyalgia had Tomasino Media did an article about everything we did in 2024 and looking towards 2025, and it included yours and all the other men who participated in that awareness project. Yeah, I probably should send you the link. I don't know.
Send it to me.
It got put out, and then it got picked up by a lot of like news stations, websites, including Cleveland's own Fox 8 News and U.S. politics.
Fox 8 is big with the veterans.
It got picked up by the Associated Press. I'll send you links. Yeah.
Yeah.
I shared it once. I know I sound so full of myself. Yeah, I was like in all these news articles, blah, blah, blah. No, but I kind of look at it once, and then they're like, oh, Tomasino Media sent me like the first batch of like news and like social, I don't know. So like news media and news stations that picked it up and put it on their website and
hey, that's awesome.
And it was like, I was like going down and down and down. So like within the first 24 hours, I think it was like well over 300 had already picked it up. And then after a week, yeah. So your name and face is out there, Joe.
I'm telling you, I'm a celebrity in my own mind. No, it's funny though, is a couple of years ago, I was on the front page of the Plain Dealer, and I thought that was pretty cool until Stars and Stripes magazine picked up the story and posted in their thing. And I'm like, I'm in Stars and Stripes. Oh my God. So that was way better than the front page of the Plain Dealer.
Yeah.
So, I loved it. You got to love it when people pick up your story.
Well, I mean, it's sometimes I don't even know. I find out like after the fact. They're like, oh, hey.
Google yourself, and you're like, oh my God, how did I get in that?
Yeah.
That's how I found out I was in Stars and Stripes. I just happened to be Googling the story, and I'm like, holy cow. So
yeah, kind of crazy. And that's what I laugh, because people are like, oh, I have a couple of people, friends and stuff. They're like, yeah, I Google you like every 6 months or so. And you're like, just my name. And then they're like, and then if you Google Kristal Kent and fibromyalgia or Kristal Kent and veteran, and I'm like,
you're a friggin' celebrity.
And like my one friend was, no, I'm not a celebrity. I would say I'm known in the spaces I represent, but as a whole, no, I'm not. And I don't celebrity, no. But then like my one friend was sending it to me. I was like, please don't send me these. I don't know. Like, I'm like, I'm like, I want to read about myself. I don't care. I said, if there's something bad, let me know. But which there isn't. But yeah, it's a very weird, because you lose some autonomy in a sense, or people only see me, they either see me as the fibro girl or the Army veteran woman, or it's sometimes that's all I'm kind of defined by. And I was like, oh, there's so much more. Like, and that's
coincidentally, those are the two things that we just talked about.
Right. Well, and sort of to kind of wrap it up and throw another thing out there. That's why I include my dogs. And now my one just crossed the Rainbow Bridge on January 10th, but he was 14 years and 4 months old. But my dogs have always been very active in what I do from advocacy awareness. They've also done, I coordinated, obviously, because they don't have imposable thumbs. So I had to put in all their information online to create awareness groups to raise funds for different organizations. So my dogs have put together, like, they're the inspiration. My dog Sydney, that was 14 years old and just passed away, he was the inspiration behind the Pause for Fibro movement that is used, and it's like hashtagged, and then Pets for Fibro. So but yeah, they've had dog packs where they walk and raise funds. It's done it over the years for the National Alliance for Mental Illness, for different veterans organizations. My dog, Sydney, like I said, it was on Facebook because I can type and he couldn't. He was all pause. But yeah, did a fundraiser for Canine Heroes for Heroes, which is a nonprofit organization that trains dogs to become medical service animals for veterans and first responders. And they've been to a lot of events. My dog Sydney was born on September 11th and I served in the Army when September 11th happened. So he's actually in the past had been invited to memorial events for September 11th. And so the whole thing is, yeah, you lose a lot of autonomy. Like a lot of people know you as the flag guy, right? Because of your flags, and that's how they know you. And so then I'm known in this way, but then adding my dogs in as an extra layer, what's really interesting, adding them in for my awareness and advocacy initiatives and fundraising, I end up on social media having people follow me simply for my dog videos. That's it. They don't have fibro. They're not a veteran. But then they are like, hey, like I've learned so much. Like didn't realize I've learned so much. And like, this is really great. I started following you because your dogs are cute and funny. And so you never know. So I kind of add that personal aspect of that, which kind of helps give me some semblance of autonomy and let people know like, hey, there's more to me than just advocacy and veteran and fibromyalgia. And I'm pretty
that's pretty much all I am, the flags and maybe a podcast here and there, but that's it. And being a veteran.
And being a veteran.
And being a veteran.
And a dad.
And a dad, a proud
and
dad.
A friend.
Yep. Yeah, I try to do good. But anyway, thank you very much for this. I enjoyed it. I'm looking forward. I'm going to get it out and then send you the link. It'll be on podcast or Spotify and also on YouTube. So thank you very much. And with that said, I will talk to you again soon.
Looking forward to it.
All right. Thanks. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right.